Major funding for these programs is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and Capital One Bank, New York Community Bank, the Witkoff Group, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, Greenberg Traurig, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Friedman, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hap Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimides, Red Apple Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Continuum Company, Urban American, and these friends.
Brooklyn, New York, Shanghai, Ithaca, New York, back to New York City, Kings Point, back to New York, and New York to take care of the community of New York. Today I have community activist and my friend Lola Finkelstein. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for asking me.
So tell me about your parents, where they came from, and
my parents were both born in the United States.
And where their parents come from?
Eastern Europe.
How'd your parents meet each other?
Oh, my father was a lawyer, and my mother was a legal secretary to a man named Jacob Holtzman. And somehow or other, she had to deliver something to my father's office, and that's how they met.
So they get married, and you said to me, and I've read about your father was he was the general practitioner, as one would say, in law. You know, he was a very entrepreneurial attorney, and you were born in Brooklyn, and you lived across the street from the Brooklyn Public Library and Botanical Gardens.
And the museum.
And the museum, all three. Where was it, President Street?
Eastern Parkway.
On Eastern Parkway. And at the age of 7 or something like that, your father and his brother, or they were in business together?
No. When my father graduated from law school, he and his older brother, who had also graduated from law school, made a trip to China. Just two young men touring. And they both fell in love with China. And then my father came home, he married, he had children, and in the meantime, his older brother had moved to Shanghai. And my father's practice was very slow. It was the beginning of the Depression. And his brother suggested that he come to Shanghai, where there were great opportunities. And so we moved to Shanghai, and we stayed there about 2 years. But my mother, who used to follow people on the street if she would hear them speaking Yiddish because she was homesick, became very aware of the Japanese threat. And she insisted that we leave before it was too late and dangerous, which did happen to many of the people who were in Shanghai and who had to stay.
Do you remember when you were a child at this time? Do you remember Shanghai?
I remember it distinctly and clearly. And when I went back 15 years ago, although the street names all were changed, because when I was there, we lived in what was called the French Concession. We lived on Avenue Pétain, for example, and now it would be a Chinese name. But I could find my way around.
Later on, when we get to when you were at Cornell, a lot of this you utilized in some writings and some.
Exactly.
So you're 7 or 8, and then your mother, and you come back to New York, and you come back to Brooklyn.
To the same apartment house.
And you're living in Brooklyn. Now, would you go to public school?
I went to PS 241, I think up until 7th grade.
And then?
And then I went to Adelphi Academy.
Which was also in Brooklyn, if I remember.
Yes.
And so when you're at Adelphi Academy, you meet this young man, right? Is that how you met your husband?
No, I didn't meet him at school.
No, I know you didn't, but during that period of time
when
you were like 13 or 14 years of age.
That's
what I'm
right,
saying.
yes. One Saturday afternoon, my parents were going to visit friends of theirs, and my mother and father said, well, come along with us. And so we went out to Flatbush, where they lived, and as we drove up to the house, I saw on the porch a young man smoking a pipe, relaxing, listening to music. And when we came into the house, I was introduced to him, but then I went inside with the adults, and at a certain point his mother went out to him and said, I think the child is bored. Would you take her for a walk? So he took me for a walk and bought me an ice cream and showed me how to use a pinball machine. And I developed a crush. And that crush was later, that's how I met my husband.
That's how you met your husband. Now, so from Adelphi Academy, how do you decide to go to Cornell?
I didn't decide to go to Cornell. My father was in the elevator one day with a neighbor whose name was Nathaniel Goldstein, and he was the Attorney General of the state of New York. My father said to him, Lola is ready for college. Where do you think she should go? He said, oh, she should go to Cornell. And so I went to Cornell.
So talk to me about the years at Cornell, because you were saying to me earlier that Cornell and China had some involvement. You loved your years at Cornell.
Oh, I loved my years at Cornell, but there was a wonderful professor whose name I can't recall now, who specialized in Chinese history. And I did study with him as well. And it was a strange time to be at university because it was wartime. There were a lot of naval ROTC young men on campus, and many of the older students had left to serve in the armed forces. Some of the women were married, and I remember a terrible time when 2 of the women's husbands were killed in bombing raids over Germany. And it was not a normal time to be at a university.
Now, you finish Cornell, and then 3 days after graduation, what happens?
I'm not sure it was 3 days, but it's something like that. Then I got married because my parents had insisted that I finish before I got married. And so I did. I finished, and then I got married.
Now, you told me that your husband, who went to Harvard and to Wharton, had an opportunity when he was initially practicing to perhaps go to CBS to be in the general counsel's office.
That's right.
Time, but his father was in an interesting business. At that time, it was hairnets and combs,
Accessories for hair.
and accessories. And it was a company, and I think his father was in the business, his brother was in the business also, and it was called Glemby. And the interesting thing is that he may have not gone to CBS, but he made his mark rather interesting in Glemby, because Glemby grew and grew in a quiet way that nobody really knew what Glemby was. I mean, they knew what it was, but Glemby was the...
That's a shame, because we did a lot of advertising.
No, but you did a lot also. No one realized that in the
I
Bergdorf
understand.
Goodman,
Exactly.
or in the Harrods,
Or Bonwit Tellers.
Bonwit Tellers,
Right.
that the salon or the beauty parlor or whatever we want was Glemby. And
True.
during the period of time, as you were saying to me, you and your husband would travel wherever there was a department store.
That's right. We never took a vacation anywhere unless there was a department store there.
And you know, and Glemby grew to like 1,400 salons around the world.
So.
And in addition to that, you know, certain people will remember that your husband was instrumental in finding this, this, let's say, stylist by the name of Kenneth.
That's right.
And Kenneth, which he was working for Glemby at this time, you opened up Kenneth, the salon, in the townhouse on East 54th Street.
That's correct.
You know, so Glemby grew, and it really became a prosperous company. So when after you got married, you moved out to Kings Point, and your husband's running Glemby, and as you say, you're traveling around the world for the salons. And then when the kids grow up, it's time to, as they would say, a pied-à-terre or something, to come to New York City. And that's really how you came to the city, and you wanted to get a job, something with the indexing.
No. I did that while I was in Great Neck, in Kings Point.
So tell me about the indexing with the New York Times, and another job that you tried to get, but you couldn't get, as you said to me.
Oh, well, my daughter, one of my daughters, was working for Arno Press, a subsidiary of the Times, and I wanted to work there too. And she told me there was an opening, and so I came for an interview. But after I was interviewed, they decided I wasn't the right person for the job. Not that I didn't know what it was required to know, but it looked like I might be frivolous, or that I might leave to go on a trip with my husband too often. And so I did not get the job. Several weeks later, after they engaged someone else, they said who wasn't working out, they said to my daughter, well, let's give your mother a try. And so I did get the job, and I did enjoy it. And at the time, they were producing very large books that included the reproductions of front pages of the newspaper, the outstanding front pages of the year. And I edited that, chose those pages. And then one time there was an opportunity to take a course given by the New York Times in indexing, and I did. And then I indexed 2 years of the Times, worked on, didn't do it alone, worked on 1909 and 1910. And then in the Times during the day, when the clerks in the morgue took their lunch break, I would be the one who would go in and cover for them. And so I used to read all the obituaries of all the people I knew that had already been prepared in the morgue. It was a wonderful time.
So when do you and your husband come to Manhattan?
I guess it was 1979.
And you come to 1979, and this is, you know, how you originally got involved with community. It was the garbage. What was the situation with the garbage and the Polaroid photographs?
Well, I used to leave the apartment every morning at about 6:30 to walk for an hour. And when I first moved into New York, thought I had just reached heaven. Everything was wonderful, was so convenient. You could get everything delivered. I could walk to Bloomingdale's. I just thought it was fantastic. The only problem was, why were the streets outside of my building so dirty? After the garbage collectors left, there seemed to be a lot of garbage. And I spoke to the building manager about it, and he said, well, he'd called the city officials or whoever it was that he called, and nobody really did anything. And so I took some Polaroid pictures of the garbage on the street, and I sent them to at the suggestion of a friend of mine, to the borough president, who was Andrew Stein at the time, and a woman who worked for him, his chief of staff, Maggie Payton, called me and said, why don't you come down and talk to us, and maybe you can work with us instead of against us. And I did. And that's how I got involved in Community Board 5.
Now, we'll talk a little bit about Community Board 5 later, but I want to talk about your heavy involvement with the Bellevue Association, how you got involved with that, because there were a lot of things that took place out of that.
Oh, but that came through Community Board 5. It was at a Community Board 5 meeting where the then borough president, Ruth Messenger, came to speak, and she asked that a representative from Community Board 5 attend the Community Advisory Board meeting at the public hospital in our catchment area. The public hospital in our catchment area was Bellevue. And she asked for volunteers, and nobody raised a hand. So the chair of the board came and stood behind me and whispered, just raise your hand. You don't have to go, but I don't want her to think that we're such elitists. And so I raised my hand. But I did go. And I went to a couple of these meetings, and then I decided it really wasn't something that I felt good about doing, because it was a group of primarily consumers with a lot of complaints. And I was just about to say to the chair of that board that I was leaving when one of the doctors, Saul Farber, as it turned out, said to me, don't give up on Bellevue. We really need you. I know another group where you will feel that you really can serve a purpose. And so he introduced me to the Bellevue Association, which is the public-private partnership for Bellevue Hospital.
Let's talk a little bit, because one of the things that people don't realize from the Bellevue Association was a couple of years ago, a magnificent facility, very important to the city of New York, was created called Alexandria Health Center, which is like on 28th or 29th Street adjacent to Bellevue. And this is the biotech center of New York. This is the leading facility where you have a lot of the tech companies and the biotech companies are headquartered. They're building the second building today. If the Bellevue Association wasn't involved, that wouldn't be there today. That would be some residential towers.
That's right, because at the time, an RFP was issued for market rate housing to be built on the land between Bellevue Hospital and NYU on the East River. And the Bellevue Association took the lead in fighting this. We hired a consulting company from Boston, I think they were called Arthur D. Little, to do a needs study. And this showed that there were still unmet medical and scientific needs in this community, and that this land should be preserved for scientific, or academic, or related work, not market rate housing. We had to do a lot of lobbying and a lot of advocating for our position. And then, very fortunately, the market changed, and nobody really wanted to build the market rate housing there. And so, in a way, we won, but not because we actually convinced the city, but because the market changed. And so fortunately,
and fortunately, you know, a number of years ago when they built the first tower, and now because the business is better, they built the second tower, and it's truly the biotech center of New York City today because of this situation.
well, it's between Bellevue Hospital and NYU. It couldn't be a more ideal location.
And many of the Bellevue and NYU researchers are there also because they've taken space within the facility. Let's talk about some of the involvement that you've done. I mean, you were president of Community Board 5 over the years.
Chair, yeah.
Chair of that. But Community Board 5 occupies from what, 14th Street?
To 60th Street.
To 60th Street from?
From the west side of Lexington to the east side of 8th Avenue.
It's major Midtown Manhattan, as we would
Exactly.
say. You know, it's the office center, it's the arts, it's Times Square.
Theater.
You know, it is the situation, and
retail.
you know, and the retail and everything, because you know that's the best retail is on Fifth Avenue in that Community Board 5 arena. But some of the initiatives that you've done with the Community Board 5 was the Times Square Hotel. Tell me about that.
The Times Square Hotel was in disrepair. Times Square altogether was in very bad shape. It was a time of drug dealing and prostitution and rundown buildings. And the Times Square Hotel was in 7A administration, I think is the technical term. And so the city had the opportunity to make a disposition of this property. They had decided to bifurcate the building, make one side a youth hostel and the other side a low end, I think, a lower end hotel. And that was what we thought was going to happen to the Times Square Hotel. When a young woman named Roseanne Haggerty had a different idea. She believed that this hotel should be dedicated to single room occupancy for formerly homeless people and to provide for them not only this home, but the support services that make it possible for them to become functioning members of society. And we were very, very impressed by Roseanne Haggerty and her vision. She's really an inspirational person. And fortunately, we were able to enlist the help of Jerry Schoenfeld, who was one of the major stakeholders in the Times Square area. And he saw the potential for this being a really brilliant idea. And so once again, with a lot of knocking on doors of elected officials, etc., we were able to convince them to change their minds. And that's how Times Square Hotel has become the model for supported housing for formerly homeless people.
Let's also talk about what the work that's happened in the theater district. You know, with the air rights and the use of the neighborhood to enhance Times Square over the years.
The Helen Hayes Theater was demolished, and that aroused the anxiety of the theater-loving community that it was possible to lose these wonderful theaters. And so in order to protect them and to make sure that they would be theaters in perpetuity, they were considered to be landmark worthy, and they were landmarked. Now with the landmarking, because it's expensive for an owner to accept landmark status, and they have obligations to maintain the landmark in good shape, and in the theater situation, they have to remain theaters in perpetuity. So for their undeveloped air rights, and they were able to sell them, and that helped them to finance.
To maintain the...
That's right.
Okay. Over the last year, you've been honored by two organizations. Tell me about that.
Well, one of them was the Landmarks Conservancy, and the other was the Historic Districts Council. And both of them were for my consistent support for preservation and for landmarking. I was involved in the Save the Theaters movement, not one of the leaders, but certainly actively involved in that. In Save St. Bart's, and in the Midtown zoning proposal, we felt there was a threat to some of the potential landmarks, and so I was very concerned about that and actively lobbied to be sure that preservation would be part of East Midtown rezoning. And I think that's why they honored me.
Talk to me about family. You have how many children?
I have 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 13 great-grandchildren.
Now we're going to test you a little bit because it's important. Tell me the names of your children and your grandchildren.
Really?
Yes, because we always like to talk about that.
Ellen is my oldest daughter, Barbara, my second daughter, David is my son, and Amy is my youngest daughter.
And the grandchildren?
Ellen's children are Naomi, Kate, Caroline, and John. Barbara's children are Laura and Jenny. David's children are Jared, Jillian, and Carrie. And who did I leave out? Amy's children are Aaron and Alex.
And there are many grandchildren, but more important than that is that, you know, you've had a very interesting life. You've traveled around the world, sometimes to open up a
Beauty salon.
Beauty salon.
But we made a lot of very good friends in all of these places.
And more important, that's how I met you, through charity and the community, and I'm very happy that you were here today.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much.